In the world of late-night TV, Bill Maher is known for his sharp wit, biting commentary, and unrelenting challenges to his guests. But tonight, things take a turn no one saw coming. Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of Florida, steps onto his stage with a calm demeanor, but a fire in her eyes. Little did Maher know. He was about to face one of the most intense, controversial, and explosive moments of his career. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? Bill Maher thought he could handle any guest, but Pam Bondi was about to shatter that illusion. Watch as she dismantles his every argument, turning the tables in a way you would never expect. This is one confrontation you won't want to miss. Make sure to like and subscribe for more jaw-dropping moments like this. The atmosphere in the studio was charged. Bill Maher had welcomed Pam Bondi onto his show with his usual sarcastic flair, but something was different this time. The crowd, normally quick to jump in with laughter at Maher's jabs, was strangely silent as Bondi took her seat across from him. Maher, who usually relished in his ability to control the conversation, could already sense the shift. The tension in the air was palpable, like an electrical charge ready to snap. "Welcome, Pam," Maher said with a smirk, his tone dripping with mockery. "You've had quite the political career, haven't you? Attorney General of Florida, close ally of the former president. What's it like to be on the side of someone who's been called everything from a hero to a villain?" The audience chuckled, clearly eager to see Bondi stumble under Maher's usual brand of political humor. But Bondi, unfazed, leaned back in her chair, her expression cool and composed. "I've seen a lot in my time in politics, Bill," she replied, her voice steady and measured. "But what I'm seeing on your show tonight is something new. I thought this was a show for real debates, not just partisan sniping. But then again, I guess that's what people expect from you, isn't it?" The crowd quieted, sensing that something had shifted. Maher's expression faltered for a moment before he quickly regained his composure. "You've got a real fire in you, Pam," Maher quipped, trying to regain the upper hand. "But tell me this, how does it feel to defend someone whose administration was mired in so much controversy? I mean, the whole Russia investigation, the impeachment trials? Isn't that a little hard to explain?" Bondi didn't miss a beat. "It's easy to explain when you actually pay attention to the facts," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly as she leaned forward. "Unlike what you like to do on this show, Bill, which is spin narratives that suit your own agenda. The Russia investigation? A witch hunt? The impeachment trials? A political game." The American people saw right through it. The studio audience reacted. There was a palpable shift. Maher had met his match. His usual smirk faded as Bondi's words hung in the air. It wasn't supposed to be this way. He had invited her on to make his usual digs, but instead, she was turning the tables on him in front of millions of viewers. "You really believe that?" Maher scoffed, trying to mask the unease creeping into his voice. "You think the countless investigations, the overwhelming evidence, the testimonies, those were all just a big political game?" Bondi's eyes locked onto Maher's with the precision of a prosecutor in a courtroom. "You know, Bill, you've made a career out of making people feel like they know what's going on. But the truth is, you've been misinformed. You've spent so much time attacking people you don't agree with that you've forgotten to look at the bigger picture. If the facts don't fit your narrative, you just change the story." Maher's face stiffened, his usual confidence cracking. The audience, too, was taken aback, unsure of how to react. Was this the Bill Maher show they all knew and loved? Or was this something else entirely? Could Bondi really be challenging Maher on his own turf, with his own audience watching? Maher tried to regain control, laughing nervously, but the words didn't come out as naturally as they usually did. "Well, it's nice to see you're passionate about it," he said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his voice. "But you can't deny that there are some serious questions about your former boss's conduct." Bondi didn't hesitate. I can deny whatever I want, Bill, but the real question is, why don't you spend as much time talking about the things that really matter? You know, like the economy, the border, the future of this country? Maher opened his mouth to retort, but before he could speak, the audience erupted into applause. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected Bondi, who was usually seen as a calm and calculated figure, to come out swinging like this. It was as if she had flipped a switch, and suddenly the tables had turned. Maher was no longer the dominant force. He was on the defensive. "Go ahead, Bill," Bondi continued. "Keep making your jokes. But don't forget that people are listening. They know the truth, and they're tired of the same tired narratives you've been pushing." Maher's face flushed. His trademark composure was slipping. He had underestimated Bondi, and now he was paying the price. What was going to happen next? Could Maher regain control of the conversation? Or had Pam Bondi already won this round? Bill Maher cleared his throat, his usual swagger not quite restored. The crowd's applause had died down, but the energy in the room was undeniable. Maher was on the back foot, a place he wasn't accustomed to. His sharp wit, which had always served as his armor, now felt dull in comparison to the calm precision of Pam Bondi. He could feel the shift. She had won the audience's attention, and it wasn't something he could easily take back. "All right, Pam, I see we're getting into it now," Maher said, trying to mask his frustration with a grin. "But let's be clear. You're here defending someone who, let's face it, is a lightning rod for controversy. The whole world was talking about the Russia investigation, and there were so many questions about what happened during his time in office. You can't deny that." Bondi's gaze never wavered. She leaned forward slightly, her posture firm, her words deliberate. "What I can deny, Bill, is the narrative you and your friends in the media have sold to the public. The Russia investigation was a political stunt from the very beginning. It was designed to distract from real issues, like the economy, foreign policy, and the safety of this country." Maher chuckled, but it was hollow. "Distract? Really? You're telling me that Russian interference in our election was just a distraction?" Bondi's lips curled into a faint smile, but it wasn't one of amusement. It was the smile of someone who knew they were about to dismantle an argument. "Yes, Bill, that's exactly what I'm saying. It's been proven, time and time again, that the media took a grain of truth and spun it into a scandal that didn't exist. There were no collusion charges, no hard evidence of election tampering. The American people got played, and you were right there in the front row, cheering it on." The room seemed to hold its breath. Maher was silent for a moment, unable to immediately find a retort. He had heard these arguments before, but never with such confidence, never with such conviction. Bondi was methodical in her delivery, each word calculated, each fact chosen with care. Maher was used to having his way with guests, but Bondi was flipping the script in real time. "Well, let's move on then," Maher finally said, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "You keep talking about the American people. But how about we talk about what's really going on right now? The Biden administration is in office, and there's a lot of concern over inflation, rising gas prices, the border crisis. You can't possibly tell me that this is all going well, right?" Bondi's eyes sparkled with a challenge. "Let's talk about it, Bill. You want to talk about inflation? Gas prices? You're absolutely right that these are major issues, but they didn't just appear overnight. Under the previous administration, the economy was booming. People had jobs, businesses were thriving, and our country was energy independent. You can't ignore the fact that these problems have gotten worse since the Democrats took over." Maher shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His signature tactic was to pivot when a conversation wasn't going his way, but Bondi was too sharp. She wasn't going to let him change the subject. "Under Biden, we've seen energy prices skyrocket. The border is a mess, and crime is on the rise in many cities. So don't sit here and tell me that everything's fine just because you can make a few jokes about the previous president, she continued. The American people deserve better than that. The audience murmured in agreement, and Maher's forced laugh only underscored the tension in the room. His show had always been a space for pushing boundaries, for challenging the status quo. But this was different. This was an interrogation, and Maher was the one being questioned. You really think the country was better off with the previous administration? Maher's tone was defensive, but there was a hint of desperation in his voice. You can't seriously believe that the chaos we saw under Trump was the better alternative, right? Bondi didn't flinch. What I believe is that people are waking up to the fact that we had a president who put America first. He fought for jobs, for lower taxes, for a strong military. And let's not forget the peace deals in the Middle East. Compare that to the disarray we're seeing now, with people trying to rewrite history to fit their narrative. The silence in the studio was deafening. Maher had no immediate answer. His usual ability to counterattack with a sharp one-liner was slipping through his fingers. This wasn't just a political debate. It was becoming a personal one, and he was struggling to keep his composure. Bill, it's time to stop pretending that the chaos of the last 2 years is acceptable. You've been so busy making jokes at the expense of others that you've forgotten the bigger picture. People are suffering, and they deserve answers. Not more of the same from people like you, Bondi added, her voice now tinged with frustration. The audience was no longer just listening. They were watching a rare moment unfold before their eyes. For once, Bill Maher wasn't the one in control. Pam Bondi had flipped the script on him, and she was making him pay for it. Maher finally leaned back in his chair, his facade cracking. All right, he said, his voice a little softer. Maybe you've got a point. But the real question is, what now? The audience waited, the tension hanging thick in the air. Bill Maher had never been in a situation like this before. He was accustomed to being the one who held all the cards, the one who steered the conversation, and the one who left his guests fumbling for words. But tonight, he was on the defensive. Pam Bondi had not only held her ground, but she had also turned the tables on him, exposing cracks in his carefully crafted image. All right, let's cut through the theatrics, Maher finally said, attempting to regain his footing. You talk about the economy, the border, the administration's failures, but tell me this, Pam. Why is it that the right seems to be getting louder and louder in their refusal to even consider any compromise? Why does it feel like the country is more divided than ever? Bondi didn't hesitate. Bill, what you're really asking is why people are fed up with the constant attacks on their values. For years, the left has pushed their own agenda, and every time they're called out for their mistakes, they throw up their hands and accuse anyone who disagrees of being unreasonable. But what's unreasonable is ignoring the will of the American people just to maintain political power. Maher scoffed, his impatience starting to show. So, what are you suggesting, Pam? That everyone who disagrees with you is just playing political games? You don't think that's a bit simplistic? Bondi's eyes narrowed slightly. Simplistic? No, Bill. What's simplistic is trying to dismiss real issues by calling people names and belittling them on your show. You've spent so much time making fun of people who disagree with you that you've forgotten what it's like to actually listen to them. Maher's face tightened. He had built his career on mocking those who didn't align with his views, but Bondi was forcing him to confront his own behavior, and it wasn't sitting well with him. You really think that's what's happening? Here? Maher shot back, trying to keep his cool. You think this is all my fault? Bondi's voice was steady, but there was an underlying fierceness in her tone. No, Bill. I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm saying that your show has become a platform for division. You have the power to bring people together through honest dialogue. But instead, you're using your influence to push people further apart. There it was again. This calm, controlled dissection of his show, his tactics, his entire approach to his platform. Maher's expression shifted. a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face for the briefest moment before he masked it with a forced chuckle. "Wow, Pam," Maher said, trying to sound lighthearted but failing. "It's nice to know that you're so concerned about my influence. I didn't realize I was so important." Bondi didn't flinch. "It's not about you, Bill. It's about what you represent. You're part of a media ecosystem that thrives on chaos and sensationalism, and you're feeding it. The real question is, are you willing to take a step back and admit that maybe, just maybe, the way you've been doing things isn't helping? Or are you going to keep playing the same game, pretending that it's all just for laughs?" The audience, who had been silent for most of the exchange, now murmured in agreement. This wasn't just a political debate anymore. It was a reflection of the media landscape, a moment where the status quo was being challenged by someone who wasn't afraid to speak her mind. Maher shifted in his seat, his tone finally losing its bite. "I don't know, Pam," he said, sounding almost defeated. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been a little too quick to dismiss people who don't see things my way. But what do you want me to do about it? You want me to just stop doing the show?" Bondi's eyes softened, but her resolve remained unshaken. "I'm not asking you to stop your show, Bill. But maybe it's time for a change. Maybe it's time to have real conversations. Conversations where people don't feel like they have to pick a side. Maybe it's time to start listening, really, listening, instead of just talking over people." The words hung in the air, and for the first time that night, Bill Maher didn't have a snappy comeback. The studio was still, the crowd waiting for him to respond. Bondi had struck a nerve, and now Maher was grappling with something he had never truly considered before: the possibility that his show, his approach, might actually be contributing to the very division he claimed to despise. For a long moment, Maher didn't speak. The silence was deafening. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "You know, Pam, I don't know if I agree with you, but I'll give you credit. You're making me think. That's more than I can say for most people." Bondi nodded, her expression unchanged. "That's all I'm asking, Bill. Just think." The show was teetering on the edge of a new dynamic. Bill Maher, for the first time in a long while, found himself in uncharted waters. The comfortable routine of taking jabs at guests and having the audience laugh at the expense of others had been turned on its head. Pam Bondi had done something few others had managed to do. She'd shifted the conversation from ridicule to reflection. Maher leaned forward, his expression more contemplative than usual. The playful edge that had defined his persona for years was absent. For the first time in ages, he seemed almost human. The crowd, sensing the change, grew quieter, waiting to see how he would respond. "I'll admit," Maher began slowly, his voice no longer laced with sarcasm, "this is the part of the show I'm least comfortable with. When I'm challenged in a way that makes me question the very nature of what I do here, it's hard to just go back to business as usual." "You've made some valid points, Pam." Bondi, sensing an opening but refusing to show any sign of victory, kept her expression neutral. She wasn't here for a pat on the back. This wasn't about winning a battle. It was about setting the stage for a deeper conversation, one that could leave a lasting impact on the audience. "But here's the thing, Bill," Bondi said, her voice even, but firm. "This country doesn't need more comedians turning every serious issue into a punchline. We don't need more politicians who think their job is to be the butt of jokes. We need real leadership, leaders who take the time to listen to both sides and have a productive discussion, not just a screaming match." Maher blinked, taken aback by her unwavering stance. He had expected to hear more of the usual political rhetoric, but instead, she had brought something far more substantive to the table. The audience, sensing the gravity of the moment, remained silent, hanging on every word. "I get it, Pam," Maher responded, his voice slightly softer now. "But what's the solution? You want me to turn my show into some kind of kumbaya fest? You want me to stop making jokes? I've spent my career challenging the status quo with humor. Bondi shook her head, the frustration finally creeping into her voice. It's not about taking away your humor, Bill. It's about balance. The issue isn't the jokes, it's the context. It's about using your platform responsibly. If you want to make people laugh, that's fine. But you have to understand that humor doesn't exist in a vacuum. People take their cues from you. What message are you sending when you mock entire groups of people for simply holding different views? Maher was silent for a long moment. The usual quick-witted retort that he'd been known for didn't come. The words felt stuck in his throat. Bondi's questions had landed too close to home. He was used to being the one who controlled the narrative. But here, in this moment, he was being forced to confront a reality he wasn't ready for. "You make it sound so simple," Maher said after a long pause. "Like I should just change everything overnight." Bondi met his gaze, unwavering. "I'm not asking you to change everything, Bill. I'm asking you to be better. I'm asking you to use your platform to challenge people to think, to open up a conversation, not shut it down." For the first time in years, Bill Maher felt a genuine pang of doubt. He had prided himself on being the guy who stirred the pot, who spoke truth to power, but now he was beginning to wonder if his approach had gone too far. Had he really been pushing people to think, or had he just been pushing them away? Had he been part of the problem all along? The silence stretched on, thick with tension, as Maher processed her words. The audience, too, was waiting. This was no longer the lively banter they were used to. This was something deeper, more serious. And then, almost unexpectedly, Maher broke the silence with a single sentence. "Maybe you're right, Pam." The words hung in the air, a surprising admission. The audience was stunned. This was Bill Maher, the man who had made a career out of dismissing his critics, out of mocking those who didn't agree with him. And here he was, acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong. Bondi didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply nodded, her expression softening for the first time. "It's all about starting somewhere, Bill. We can't change everything overnight. But we can start by being better today." There was a moment of quiet understanding between them, as though both had reached an unspoken agreement. The confrontation had given way to something far more meaningful, an invitation to challenge the way they had been doing things, both on the show and in the world at large. As Maher sat back in his chair, his face thoughtful, the audience slowly began to applaud. It wasn't the usual thunderous applause after a punchline, but a more subdued, respectful kind of acknowledgement. They had witnessed something rare, a moment of genuine introspection in a world that often valued spectacle over substance. Pam Bondi had done the unthinkable. She had forced Bill Maher to question not just his show, but the entire framework of his career. And in that moment, both of them had learned something valuable about the nature of dialogue, respect, and the power of listening. The tension in the room had shifted, from the sharp jabs of comedians to a subtle yet undeniable sense of unity. For a brief moment, Bill Maher wasn't the witty host who thrived on controversy. He was just another person, reflecting on the impact of his words. Pam Bondi had managed to change the narrative entirely, and in doing so, she had forced the audience to look at things through a different lens. But Bill Maher wasn't one to back down easily. As the applause from the audience gradually died down, he cleared his throat, sitting up straighter. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew this conversation wasn't over. The change in Maher was apparent, but there was still one last hurdle to cross. Would he take the lesson to heart, or would his instinct for self-preservation win out in the end? "I won't lie, Pam," Maher started, his voice firming up once again. "You've got a point. Maybe I've crossed the line too many times. But here's the thing. You say I should be better. But how do I do that in a world where everyone's so ready to tear you down the moment you say something they don't like?" Pam leaned forward, her eyes steady. "You start by looking at who you're talking to, Bill. You start by recognizing the humanity of the people you're engaging with. It's not just about what's funny or what makes headlines, it's about what's true and what's fair. Maher tilted his head slightly, considering her words. There was something about the way Pam spoke, so direct, yet thoughtful, that was hard to argue with. He had built his career on challenging the powerful and mocking those in authority. But now, with a guest who had called him out in front of millions, he was beginning to wonder if he had become part of the problem he'd always criticized. "I've spent my career making fun of the powerful," Maher admitted, his voice quieter now. "But maybe in the process, I've become one of them. Someone who doesn't listen, who doesn't take others seriously." Bondi smiled, though it wasn't a triumphant grin. It was a smile that acknowledged the weight of the moment. She had brought him to this realization. But it wasn't about winning a battle. It was about planting the seeds of change. For the first time, Bill Maher seemed open to listening. And for Pam, that was victory enough. "You're not the enemy, Bill," she said. "None of us are. But we can all do better. It's not about erasing humor or shutting down conversation. It's about having those conversations with respect. It's about having the courage to listen and the wisdom to know when to challenge ourselves." Maher exhaled deeply, as though releasing years of tension he didn't even realize he had been holding on to. "Maybe it's time I took a step back. Maybe it's time I reevaluated my role in all of this." The crowd was quiet once more. Maher, for all his years of deflecting and dominating the stage, had just acknowledged something profound. The role of a comedian wasn't just to entertain, it was to provoke thought, and it wasn't enough to provoke for the sake of provocation. There had to be more. As the cameras rolled and the audience held their breath, Maher turned to Pam, his tone now sincere. "I appreciate you challenging me, Pam. You've given me a lot to think about. I don't know if I'll change overnight, but maybe this is a good place to start." Pam nodded, a hint of pride in her eyes. "That's all anyone can ask for, Bill. Just start." The show ended with a surprising note of mutual respect, something that was rare in the cutthroat world of late-night television. Bill Maher, once the king of controversy, had been confronted by a guest who didn't just spar with him, she made him see the bigger picture. Pam Bondi had done more than just hold her ground. She had opened a door that Maher could walk through if he chose to. As the cameras cut away and the lights began to fade, the audience began to realize that they had witnessed something truly remarkable, a conversation that went beyond entertainment, beyond politics, into something deeper. This wasn't just a late-night showdown. This was a moment of growth, of introspection, of understanding. And for Pam Bondi, that was enough. She had come on the show to make a statement, to challenge an idea that had gone unchecked for too long. And in doing so, she had achieved something even greater. She had changed the conversation.